Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I've always been a sucker for the weird side of the internet. You know, the kind of stuff most people steer clear of. The deep dive into conspiracy theories, unexplainable phenomena, and those strange forums that claim to know more about our world than we'd like to admit. But, like most curious people, I eventually found myself exploring the dark web. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just browsing, clicking around in those hidden corners where the usual rules of the internet didn't apply. Most of the time, it was just the typical shady stuff. Fake passports, questionable services, and bizarre chat rooms. But one night, something caught my eye that I couldn't shake. It was a small, almost hidden forum with a simple title: Alien Simulations, Real Communication. I know how it sounds. Ridiculous, right? But the thing about the dark web is that it's full of hoaxes, and I thought this was just another one of them. Still, I clicked on it, more out of curiosity than anything. The page was bare bones, just a black background with white text and a link at the bottom that said, "Download now." There wasn't much in terms of explanation, just a single paragraph that read, "This program simulates communication with extraterrestrial life forms. It generates realistic scenarios based on real reports from abductees and UFO sightings. Proceed with caution." I laughed to myself. It was clearly some kind of game or software designed to creep people out, like one of those old text-based horror adventures. But, like a fool, I clicked the download button. The file was small, and it installed faster than I expected. The icon on my desktop was a simple, unmarked symbol, just a circle with a single dot in the middle. I stared at it for a minute, feeling a strange sense of unease. There was no way this was anything real, right? It was just a program, probably designed to pull off some elaborate prank. So, I clicked it. The screen went black for a second before a window popped up, asking for permission to access my microphone and webcam. That should have been my first red flag, but I didn't think twice about it. I clicked allow. The program opened with a flicker and a message appeared on the screen. Connection established. Waiting for signal. The room around me was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the hum of my computer's fan, the soft ticking of a clock on the wall, but nothing else. I waited, my eyes fixed on the screen, half expecting some cheesy alien image or fake transmission to appear. But instead, the message changed. Signal found. Preparing for contact. The screen flickered again, and suddenly, the speakers on my computer crackled to life. At first, it was just static, that familiar hiss and pop of white noise. But then, through the static, I heard something else. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable, but it was there. A low, rhythmic hum, like some kind of strange mechanical breathing. I leaned in closer, squinting at the screen, but there was nothing to see, just the black background and that message. Then, the program started typing on its own. "We are here. We have been watching." A chill ran down my spine. It was a cheap trick, I thought. The program probably just pulls random lines from online conspiracy theories and spits them out to mess with you. But the more I listened to the sound, the more it felt real. The hum grew louder, and beneath it, I could hear something else. It wasn't human. No way. It was like a voice, but garbled, distorted, and far away, like it was trying to speak through layers of static and interference. I typed back, feeling stupid for playing along, but also unable to resist. "Who are you?" There was a pause, and then the screen flickered again. More text appeared. "We are many. We are closer than you think." Okay, I had to admit, it was getting to me. The voice, the way the messages seemed to respond to my input, it all felt too personal, too direct. I sat back in my chair, feeling that creeping sense of paranoia you get when you watch a horror movie alone at night and suddenly start noticing all the little sounds around you. But I wasn't about to let a program freak me out, so I shut it down. I closed the window, deleted the file, and told myself it was just a prank. That was the rational thing to do, right? Except the hum didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was in the room. I could hear it, low and steady, vibrating through the air like an engine idling far below the surface. I stood up, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing. No device, no machine, no explanation. And then I saw it, just outside my window, in the distance, a faint light. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there, hovering in the sky, pulsating with the same rhythm as the hum in my room. My heart raced. It had to be a coincidence. Some kind of drone, maybe? But the light wasn't moving like a drone. It was too steady, too deliberate, just hanging there, as if it was watching me. I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. The hum grew louder, more insistent, vibrating through my chest now. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone, anyone, but the screen was dead. No signal. Nothing. The light outside flickered, then blinked out, but the hum, it didn't leave. It stayed with me, echoing through the walls, through my mind. I tried to sleep that night, but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear it, the hum, the faint whispers beneath it, and that voice from the program repeating over and over again in my head. "We are closer than you think." It was just a program, I kept telling myself. A simulation, nothing real. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I had opened a door, and whatever was on the other side, it was coming through. I didn't sleep much after that night. Every time I drifted off, that low hum would pull me back, as if it were inside my head, vibrating through my bones. It wasn't just the sound, though. It was the feeling that came with it. The air felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing against me, closing in from all sides. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had all been in my head. Sleep deprivation, maybe. Too much time spent staring at a screen, diving into the darkest corners of the internet. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the hum wouldn't go away. I went through my day in a haze, the sound always there in the background, like an invisible presence following me. Work was a blur. I couldn't focus. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone lurking just out of sight. It wasn't until that evening that things took another turn. I had just gotten home, trying to shake off the weirdness of the last 24 hours. I sat down at my desk, intending to get some work done, but as soon as I opened my laptop, my stomach dropped. The program, the one I deleted, was back. The icon, that simple circle with a dot, was sitting there on my desktop, as if it had never been removed. My first instinct was to panic. I checked my recycling bin, my files, everything, but there was no trace of the original download. It shouldn't have been there. I hovered the mouse over the icon, my hand trembling. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me not to open it again, to just wipe my entire computer clean, and walk away. But instead, I clicked. The screen flickered, and the same black window popped up, the text glowing on the screen. Connection established. Signal found. This time, I didn't need to wait for the sound. The hum was immediate, louder than before, as if the program had been running in the background the whole time, waiting for me to come back. The text started typing again, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. "We know you are listening." I froze. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. There was something different this time, something more direct, more invasive. It didn't feel like I was communicating with a simulation anymore. It felt like I was really being watched. Before I could react, the webcam light flickered on. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't touched the camera, but it was definitely recording now. I quickly reached for the tape I usually kept over it, but before I could cover the lens, another message appeared on the screen. "Don't hide." The hum grew louder, vibrating through the desk, through my chair, and for the first time, I felt it in my chest. A deep, resonating pressure, as if something was physically inside the room with me, moving closer. I stood up, nearly knocking over my chair, and backed away from the computer. The webcam light blinked off, but the screen remained black, with just the text glowing faintly in the darkness. "You invited us. Now we are here." My heart was racing, every instinct screaming at me to leave the room, to get as far away from the computer as possible. But I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, staring at the screen, waiting for whatever came next. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the program shut itself down. The screen went black, the hum stopped, and the room fell into an eerie silence. I stood there, my breath coming in shallow gasps, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But before I could process it, my phone buzzed. I grabbed it from the desk, desperate for some kind of normalcy. But when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped again. It was a message from an unknown number. No name, no profile picture, just a single line of text. "We see you." I dropped the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I rushed to the window, pulling back the curtains just enough to peer outside, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. But the street was empty, just the faint glow of streetlights and the occasional car passing by in the distance. I tried to calm myself down. It was a prank, I told myself. Someone had hacked into the program, tracked my webcam, and was messing with me. It wasn't real. It couldn't be. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The hum, the strange messages, it was all too specific, too targeted. It wasn't just a hacker. It was something else, something that was getting closer. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel it, the presence. It was like someone was standing just outside my room, waiting for me to drift off before making their move. The darkness felt alive, shifting and pulsing with the same rhythmic hum that had followed me since the program first opened. I must have dozed off at some point, because when I woke up, the sun was just starting to peek through the blinds. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, that it was just some twisted nightmare brought on by too many hours online. But then my phone buzzed again. Another message, another unknown number. This time, it wasn't just a line of text. It was a photo. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it. The image was blurry, like it had been taken in a hurry, but I recognized the setting immediately. It was a photo of me, sitting at my desk, in my room, from the night before. The angle was wrong though. It wasn't taken from my webcam. It was from outside, through my window. I dropped the phone, my mind spinning. How was that possible? I checked the window. There was no one out there. But the picture didn't lie. Someone, or something, had been watching me. And now, they wanted me to know. I ran to the window, throwing it open and scanning the street below. But, just like the night before, there was no one. The street was empty. But as I stood there, trying to make sense of it all, I heard something. It was faint, barely audible over the morning sounds of traffic. But it was there. The hum. It was coming from somewhere nearby, growing louder, more insistent. I backed away from the window, my heart racing. They were here. And this time, they weren't just watching. I slammed the window shut, the glass rattling, as if I could somehow trap the hum outside. But I knew it wasn't that simple. The hum wasn't coming from the street. It was everywhere. It vibrated through the walls, through the floor, and deep into my chest. It was in my mind. I grabbed my phone, pacing the room, my pulse racing. I needed to do something. Anything. I opened the contacts list and hovered over a few names, wondering if I should call someone. But who would believe me? The thought of explaining all of this felt ridiculous. I could already hear their responses. You downloaded what? From where? My hands were shaking, and I could still feel the cold weight of that photo on my phone. Someone had been outside my window. Someone had taken that picture, but there had been no one there. The hum grew louder, and I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted out of my apartment, the door slamming behind me. The hallway was empty, but the sensation of being watched clung to me, thick and oppressive. I made my way to the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time, trying to get as far away from my apartment as possible, but the hum followed. I ran out onto the street, and for a moment, the world seemed almost normal. People passed by, going about their day like nothing was wrong, but I knew better. I could still hear it, still feel it, their eyes on me. I kept walking, not knowing where to go, just moving. The farther I got from home, the more I convinced myself that maybe it was all in my head. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. The hum was quieter out here, just a faint whisper in the back of my mind. But then, as I crossed the street, I saw them, standing on the opposite side, half hidden in the shadows of a building, was a figure, tall, thin, and too still. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, some stranger leaning against the wall. But then it moved. Or rather, it didn't move at all, but the light shifted, revealing more of its form. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, dark, hollow pits, seemed to lock onto mine the moment I noticed it. I froze in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared at me. I turned and bolted down the nearest alleyway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could feel the air thickening around me, that same suffocating presence closing in. The hum was relentless now, growing louder with every step I took. My mind raced with thoughts I couldn't control, but one thing was certain. I wasn't alone anymore. I glanced back as I reached the end of the alley. The figure hadn't followed me, but just as relief began to wash over me, I saw something else. Another figure, standing at the entrance to the alley I had just come through. The same pale skin, the same hollow eyes, but this one was closer. I didn't have time to process it. I took off again, running through the winding streets, past rows of buildings that suddenly felt like they were closing in on me. Every corner I turned, I expected to see another one of them, waiting, watching. But for now, the streets were empty. I ducked into a coffee shop, hoping to blend in, to disappear in the crowd. The smell of coffee hit me like a wave, grounding me in the moment, but it wasn't enough to shake the feeling that they were still there, lurking just beyond the glass. I sat at a table near the back, trying to catch my breath, my mind racing. I pulled out my phone, desperate for some kind of explanation, something that would make this all make sense. Maybe I could find the original forum where I downloaded the program. Maybe someone had posted about what was happening. Maybe I wasn't alone in this. I opened the browser and searched for the page, but it was gone, completely scrubbed from the dark web. No traces, no links, not even a cached version. It was as if the site had never existed. The hum had quieted, but I could still feel it, lurking in the background, like a static charge waiting to explode. I scrolled through more pages, hoping for some clue, but found nothing. Frustration and fear twisted together, tightening in my chest. Then my phone buzzed. Another message. My heart stopped when I saw the sender. An unknown number. And this time, the message wasn't text. It was another photo. With trembling hands, I opened it. It was a picture of me, sitting in the coffee shop. From behind, someone had taken it just moments ago. I spun around, my eyes scanning the crowded space, but there was no one there who stood out. Just regular people, sipping coffee, typing on laptops. I felt sick. My skin crawled, and the walls seemed to close in on me. I stood up, my knees weak, and walked out of the coffee shop, back into the street. The sky had darkened, clouds swirling overhead, but the streets were still busy. People hurried past, going about their day, as if nothing was wrong, as if everything was normal. But I knew better. They were everywhere. I started walking again, not sure where I was going, just trying to put distance between myself and whatever had taken that photo. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and my head throbbed with each passing moment. My thoughts were jumbled, frantic, like static in my brain. I glanced around, searching for any sign of the figures, but the street seemed empty. For the first time all day, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I could outrun them. Maybe I could get away. But then, the lights on the street flickered. The hum intensified, vibrating through the ground, through the air. I could feel it pressing in from all sides. The shadows around me seemed to stretch, warping the edges of the buildings, twisting into shapes that weren't quite human. And then, I saw them, dozens of them, pale, thin figures, standing at the edges of the street, their hollow eyes locked onto me. They didn't move. They didn't need to. They were already everywhere. The hum was deafening now, pounding in my skull, drowning out every other sound. I stumbled backward, my legs trembling as the figures began to move, slowly, deliberately, towards me. I turned and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I knew it was pointless. No matter how fast I went, no matter where I hid, they would always be there. They had come through the program, through the signal, and now they were real, and they weren't going to stop. I ran until my legs gave out, the hum echoing in my ears like a living thing. Every street I turned down seemed to twist and shift, as if the city itself was bending to the presence of those figures. The world around me felt unreal, as though I had stepped into some kind of waking nightmare. But no matter how hard I blinked, I couldn't escape it. I finally collapsed in an alleyway, my chest heaving, my vision blurred from exhaustion and fear. The street beyond was quiet, but I knew better than to trust that silence. I knew they were still out there, waiting. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but my shaking hands instinctively pulled it from my pocket. Another message. No photo this time, just one simple, terrifying word. Soon. I nearly dropped the phone, my mind spinning. What did they want? Why were they toying with me like this? It felt like I was caught in a game, but the rules were unknown, and the consequences were growing more real with every passing second. The hum in my head began to change, distorting and warping, almost like it was trying to form words. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the sound only grew louder, more insistent, like it was burrowing into my skull. Then I felt it, a shift in the air around me, a pressure building that made my skin prickle with the same sensation I had felt back in my apartment. I opened my eyes and immediately regretted it. At the far end of the alley, a figure stood, bathed in the dim glow of a distant streetlight. Pale and tall, its hollow eyes fixed on me, unblinking. It didn't move, but I could feel it pulling me toward it, as if the very space between us was shrinking, warping. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to my feet. I had to get out of there, had to move. But before I could make it to the other end of the alley, the streetlights began flickering. My breath caught in my throat. I spun around, and my worst fear was confirmed. More figures, blocking the exit. I was trapped. The hum was louder than ever now, vibrating through my body like 1,000 invisible hands pushing and pulling at me. I backed away, my head spinning, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the alley seemed to close in, warping and stretching in that unnatural way, distorting reality around me. One of the figures took a step forward. I froze, my legs refusing to move, as the figure slowly extended a long, spindly arm. Its hand, no, claw, reached out toward me, its fingers impossibly long and sharp, almost like they were made of bone. A voice, low and garbled, rang out inside my head, cutting through the hum. It wasn't a language I recognized, but I understood it all the same. It was a command, an order. Come! Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, darting down a side passage, praying that it wouldn't be a dead end. The alley twisted and turned in ways that didn't make sense, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I could feel them behind me, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. The hum was everywhere, like it was wrapped around me, pulling me closer to them no matter how fast I ran. Just when I thought I was out of options, I spotted an old, rusted door on the side of one of the buildings. Without thinking, I lunged for it, yanking it open and slipping inside. I slammed the door shut behind me, pressing my back against it as if I could somehow hold them off with my own weight. The room was pitch dark. I fumbled for my phone, using the faint light from the screen to look around. It was some kind of basement, damp and cold, the air thick with the smell of mildew. The walls were lined with old, decaying boxes and broken furniture, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that I was inside, and they were out there, for now. I crouched in the corner, trying to steady my breathing, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. What were they? Why had this happened? And why me? The hum had quieted, but I knew it hadn't left. It was lurking, just out of reach, waiting for me to let my guard down. I glanced at my phone again, desperate for any kind of escape, any kind of explanation. I opened the dark web browser, hoping, no, praying, that the site where I'd downloaded the program would still be there. Maybe there was something I'd missed, some hidden detail that could explain what was happening to me, but the sight was still gone. No traces, no links. My heart sank, the reality of the situation pressing down on me. There was no escape, no way to undo what I had done. But just as I was about to give up, something caught my eye. A new message. It wasn't from an unknown number this time. It was from the program. Communication complete. Welcome. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Welcome? To what? I tried typing a response, my fingers shaking. What do you want from me? The reply was instant. You asked to see. Now you will join. The hum returned, louder than ever, vibrating through the walls, the floor, my very bones. I looked up, and there, in the darkness of the room, I saw them, the figures. They were inside, standing there, just inches away, their hollow eyes watching me. I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't hide. And then they moved. Slowly, deliberately, they stepped forward, closing in around me. The hum reached a deafening pitch, filling my mind, drowning out my thoughts. I backed away, but there was nowhere left to go. One of the figures reached out, its cold skeletal hand brushing against my arm. A jolt of electricity shot through me, freezing me in place. The air around me seemed to warp, twisting in impossible ways, and for a brief moment, I could see beyond the room, beyond the walls. I saw them, not just the figures in front of me, but something larger, something far more terrifying. A vast, pulsating presence that stretched across the sky, the ground, the very fabric of reality. It wasn't just here. It was everywhere, and it was waiting. The figures stepped closer, their voices now inside my head, clearer than ever. Join us. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of the hum, deep and constant, filling the air, filling my mind until there was nothing left but silence. The darkness swallowed me whole, and for a moment I thought I was dead. The world around me vanished, leaving nothing but the endless hum, vibrating through every inch of my being. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. It was like my mind was no longer my own, but slowly I realized I wasn't dead. I was somewhere else. The hum faded to a low, distant pulse, and I opened my eyes to a strange, surreal landscape. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. The sky was a deep, endless black, and beneath my feet stretched a vast, shimmering field of light. The ground didn't feel solid. It was like I was standing on the surface of a liquid that rippled and shimmered with every step I took. I wasn't alone. The figures were there too, but they were different now. No longer the silent, hollow-eyed watchers I had seen before. They moved with purpose, their bodies flowing like liquid, shifting and warping with the strange energy that filled the space around us. I could feel them inside my head, all of them, their voices whispering together, a chorus of thoughts and commands that blended into one. And through it all, I could still hear the hum, now a steady rhythm that pulsed in time with the shimmering light beneath my feet. I wasn't sure how I got here, but I knew what was happening. The communication wasn't just a one-way street. The program had done more than simulate contact with them. It had opened a door, one I couldn't close. I had stepped through. One of the figures moved toward me, and I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It wasn't fear, at least not in the way I had felt it before. It was like something inside me was shifting, changing, and I couldn't stop it. You are part of us now, the voice inside my head whispered. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't even cold. It was just a statement of fact, like this had been inevitable from the moment I downloaded that program. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth moved, but no sound emerged. It didn't matter. They could hear my thoughts as clearly as if I had spoken them aloud. "What do you want from me?" I thought, my mind swirling with panic and confusion. "Why are you doing this?" The answer came immediately, as if they had been waiting for the question. "You asked to see." I tried to protest, to scream that I hadn't known, that I hadn't understood what I was getting into, but it didn't matter. They had shown me what they were, and now I was part of it. The ground beneath me began to shift, the shimmering light growing brighter, more intense. I could feel it seeping into my skin, filling me with a strange, electric energy. My body felt weightless, like I was being pulled into the light itself, becoming one with the strange, pulsating rhythm that surrounded us. The figures circled around me, their bodies shifting and flowing like water, their voices growing louder, merging into a single, overwhelming presence that filled my mind. I could feel them pressing into my thoughts, shaping them, bending them to their will. I wanted to fight it, to resist, but the harder I tried, the more I felt myself slipping away, like sand being pulled through my fingers. The light consumed me, and I realized with a growing sense of dread that I wasn't just seeing them anymore. I was becoming one of them. The figures moved closer, their hands reaching out to touch me, to pull me into their world. I could feel my body changing, warping to match theirs, my skin growing pale and translucent, my eyes losing their color, becoming the same hollow voids I had seen in them. "Join us," the voice whispered again. But this time, it wasn't just their voice. It was mine, too. I looked down at my hands, watching in horror as they stretched and shifted, the bones elongating, my fingers becoming sharp, spindly claws. My body felt foreign, unfamiliar, but at the same time, it felt right, like this was what I had always been meant to become. I was part of something larger now, something ancient, something vast. The connection between us grew stronger with each passing second, and I could feel the presence of all of them, stretching across time and space, their thoughts and memories blending with mine. The hum was everywhere, filling the air, filling my mind. It was no longer something outside of me. It was me. I had become the signal. The last shred of my human self clung to the edge of my consciousness, desperately trying to hold on, but I knew it was futile. I had seen too much. There was no going back. The figures stepped back, their hollow eyes watching me with what felt like satisfaction. I wasn't afraid anymore. I couldn't be. Fear was a human emotion, and I wasn't human anymore. I was one of them. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went quiet. I was back in my apartment. The hum was gone. The figures were gone. Everything looked exactly the way it had before. My desk, my computer, the flickering light from the street outside. It was as if nothing had happened, but I knew that wasn't true. I walked to the window, my movements slow, deliberate, and looked outside. The street was empty, quiet, but I could feel them. They were still there, just beneath the surface, waiting, watching, and I was with them now. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't confused. I understood everything. The program had done more than just simulate communication. It had brought them into our world, and in doing so, had brought me into theirs. And now, they were here. They were real. And soon everyone else would see them too. I was sent to Antarctica to investigate a signal picked up on the dark web. What I found is not human. It started with a random message, one of those late night pings that pop up when you're already 3 hours into some deep web forum, scrolling through thread after thread about things you know you shouldn't be reading. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just the usual underground rabbit holes that only show up when you go digging. The message was short. You've been selected. Are you interested in the truth? I should have ignored it. But of course, I didn't. The user was anonymous. No profile picture. No history of posts. Just a single link. It was cryptic and vague. The kind of thing you see all the time on the dark web. But something about the timing, or maybe just the boredom, got the best of me. So, I clicked it. The link led to a series of documents, all heavily encrypted, but at the bottom of the page, there was an audio file labeled Antarctic Signal. No context, no explanation, just that title. I don't know what I was expecting when I hit play, but what I heard wasn't static or some distant radio frequency. It was a low hum, almost a rumble, like something deep underground, vibrating through the earth. It had a rhythm, a pattern, but no matter how long I listened, I couldn't place it. It made me feel uneasy, like it was trying to communicate something, but in a way that only made sense if you weren't human. I should have closed the file right then. I should have stopped, but I didn't. I wanted to know more. The next day, I got another message. This time, it wasn't vague. It had details, more than I expected. Whoever was on the other side of that screen knew who I was. They knew my name, my job, and everything about my online activity. The message said I had been invited to take part in an investigation, something off the books. They wanted me to go to Antarctica. There was a research station, they said, where the signal was being monitored, and they needed someone like me, someone who could blend in, who knew the dark corners of the internet and wouldn't ask too many questions. I didn't believe it at first. I mean, why me? I'm just some random guy who spends too much time online. But then, an offer appeared. Plane tickets, travel documents, a fake job as a contractor working on communications equipment for a private company down there. It was all laid out, easy as that, and all I had to do was show up. Looking back now, I wish I had never responded, but in that moment, the mystery of it all hooked me. What was the signal? Why was it buried so deep that only a handful of people knew about it? I wanted answers. I wanted the truth. So, a week later, I was on a plane, bound for the most remote place on Earth. The research station was about as isolated as it gets. A cluster of metal buildings surrounded by endless miles of ice and snow, the kind of cold that bites through you no matter how many layers you're wearing. When I arrived, the place felt more like a bunker than a science facility. It was clear from the start that this wasn't your standard research mission. There were no scientists in lab coats, no friendly introductions, just a handful of people, all of them keeping to themselves, none of them looking me in the eye. The head of the station was a guy named Dr. Willis. He was older, quiet, and constantly on edge, like he was carrying the weight of something he couldn't talk about. He gave me a brief tour of the facility, showing me where I'd be working. Just basic comm stuff, nothing complicated. But then, as we walked through the hallways, he stopped in front of a locked door at the back of the station. "This is off limits," he said, his voice low. "Don't ask about it, and don't go near it." I nodded, but something in his tone stuck with me. The way he looked at that door wasn't the way you'd look at just any restricted area. It was something else, something that scared him. Over the next few days, I settled into the routine. The work was simple enough, just maintaining communication systems and running diagnostics. But the atmosphere in the station was thick with tension. Everyone moved quickly, avoiding conversation, and no one ever stayed out in the open longer than they had to. At night, the wind howled outside, and sometimes when I was lying in bed, I swore I could hear that same low hum from the audiophile, faint but constant, coming from deep beneath the ice. Then, about a week in, I started noticing things. At first, it was subtle. Small power surges, strange noises in the middle of the night, the comms equipment flickering for no reason. I asked Willis about it, but he brushed it off, saying it was just the harsh conditions messing with the systems. But then, I overheard one of the other workers talking in the hallway. They were whispering about the source, about how something had shifted, about how the signal wasn't stable anymore. I should have turned around right then. But curiosity got the best of me, just like it always does. I pushed the door open, and the cold air from the corridor rushed into the room. Inside, the room was dark, lit only by the glow of monitors and equipment. At the center of the room was a large metal hatch in the floor, with cables running from it to the walls, like some kind of containment unit. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the weight of the entire station was pressing down on me. And then I heard it again, that hum. But this time, it was louder, more pronounced. I approached the hatch slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The closer I got, the more intense the sound became, vibrating through the floor, through my body. I reached out, my hand trembling, and placed it on the metal surface of the hatch. The hum stopped, and in the sudden silence, I felt something, not physically, but mentally, like a presence in the room, watching me, probing at my thoughts. I pulled my hand away, stumbling back in fear. Whatever was down there, it wasn't human. I didn't sleep that night. After what I felt in that room, sleep wasn't an option. I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in my head. The hum, the silence, and that presence. It was like someone or something had touched my mind just for a second, but long enough to leave a mark. I thought about telling Willis, about coming clean, but what would I say? That I broke into the one place I was told to avoid, that I touched something I had no business messing with. No, I couldn't do that. The less he knew, the better. The next morning, the atmosphere in the station had shifted. Everyone seemed on edge, more than usual. People were talking in hushed voices, glancing over their shoulders as if they could sense it too. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just in my head. Something had changed. At breakfast, I overheard two of the workers, Reed and Langley, whispering near the corner of the dining hall. They didn't notice me, not at first, so I just stayed quiet, listening. "I don't care what Willis says," Reed muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the generator. "The signal's stronger. We've been picking it up all night." Langley nodded, her face pale. "It's not just the signal. Something's moving down there. They don't want to admit it, but they know. It's waking up." That was enough for me. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Reed shot me a look, half suspicious, half scared. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice a little too sharp. I hesitated, trying to play it cool. "Just curious," I said. "What's all this about a signal?" Langley glanced at Reed before speaking. "You've been here long enough. You've heard it, right? The hum." I nodded slowly. Yeah, I've heard it. Reed leaned in, his voice lowering to a near whisper. That's not just interference or some natural phenomenon. It's coming from something under the ice, something old. Willis won't tell us what it is, but whatever it is, it's been dormant for a long time. And now? I asked, my throat tightening. Now, it's not so dormant anymore, Langley said, her eyes darting around the room. The equipment has been picking up activity, more frequent, more intense. It's like the signal is waking it up. I wanted to ask more, but Willis walked into the room, and the conversation ended as quickly as it had started. Reed and Langley shut up immediately, pretending they hadn't said anything. I did the same, trying to act normal as Willis gave me a brief nod, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. But I couldn't shake what I'd just heard. Something was waking up, something that had been buried beneath the ice for who knows how long, and I'd felt it. I had been in that room, touched the hatch. I wasn't just hearing the hum. I was connected to whatever was down there. That night, I decided to go back. It was a stupid idea, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know. The hum was louder now, more frequent, almost like it was pulsing, growing stronger with every hour. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating through the walls of the station, through the floor, and I knew there wasn't much time left before whatever was down there woke up. I waited until the station was quiet, until I was sure everyone else was asleep, and then I made my way back to the locked room. Except this time, the door wasn't just unlocked. It was open. Someone else had been here, maybe recently. I stepped inside, the air colder than before, the hum even louder now. The glow from the monitors cast eerie shadows across the walls, but the real focus was still the hatch. It sat in the center of the room, a solid slab of metal embedded in the floor, cables running from it to every corner of the space, feeding data to the machines. The presence was back too. I could feel it the second I entered the room, but this time, it wasn't subtle. It wasn't waiting for me to reach out. It was reaching for me. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I stepped closer, my heart pounding. The hum grew louder, almost like a heartbeat, steady and rhythmic, and as I approached the hatch, I felt the presence grow stronger, more insistent. I knelt down, my hand hovering over the cold metal surface. The air was thick, heavy, with something I couldn't describe, and my mind was screaming at me to stop, to get out of that room and never look back. But I didn't. I touched the hatch, and the world shifted. For a moment, everything went dark. I wasn't in the room anymore. I wasn't anywhere. It was like I had been pulled into some endless void, suspended in nothingness, with only the hum to keep me grounded. But in the darkness, I saw things, flashes of images, quick and fleeting, like memories that weren't mine. I saw a city, ancient and crumbling, built from stone and metal, surrounded by an endless expanse of ice. There were figures, tall, shadowed forms, moving through the ruins, their faces hidden, their movements slow and deliberate. They weren't human. They were something else. Then the scene shifted. I was deep underground, buried beneath miles of ice, standing in a vast chamber illuminated by a strange, pulsating light. And in the center of that chamber, something moved, something massive, something alive. I snapped back to reality, gasping for breath, my hand still on the hatch. The hum had stopped. The room was silent, but the presence was still there, watching me, waiting. And then, slowly, the hatch began to open. A sharp hiss of air escaped from beneath it, and the cold, stale smell of something ancient filled the room. I stumbled back, my heart racing, but I couldn't take my eyes off the hatch as it slid open, revealing a dark, gaping hole that led deep into the ice. Whatever was down there, it was awake now. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to see any of this, but it didn't matter anymore. I had crossed the line, and now there was no turning back. The hatch groaned open, the sound cutting through the icy air like a scream in the dark. I backed away, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts as the opening yawned wider, revealing nothing but a black void beneath the station. The hum, which had been a constant presence in my mind, had stopped. The silence that replaced it was suffocating, unnatural, as if the air itself was holding its breath. My heart was pounding in my chest. I should have run. I should have turned around, left that room, and pretended I had never seen any of this. But something in me wanted to know what was down there. Whatever had been asleep beneath the ice was awake now, and it was calling me. I grabbed a flashlight from the nearby equipment shelf, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the switch. The beam flickered to life, casting long shadows across the walls. The darkness below the hatch seemed to swallow the light, making it impossible to see more than a few feet down. I hesitated, staring into the abyss. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. I had to know. Taking a deep breath, I swung my legs over the edge of the hatch and lowered myself onto the metal ladder bolted to the side of the shaft. The cold from the metal burned through my gloves as I descended, one shaky step after another, my breath fogging up in the frigid air. The deeper I went, the more I felt it, that presence. It was stronger now, pushing against my thoughts, slipping into my mind like a whisper in the back of my head. It wasn't hostile, not exactly, but it was probing, testing me, like it was trying to figure out who I was, why I had come. The ladder seemed to go on forever. I don't know how long I climbed, but it felt like hours. The cold was biting at my skin, seeping through every layer of clothing. But worse than the cold was the growing sense of dread building inside me. It was like descending into the belly of something ancient, something that had been waiting for centuries to be disturbed. Finally, my feet touched solid ground. I clicked off the flashlight, letting my eyes adjust to the dim glow emanating from somewhere deep within the tunnel ahead of me. It wasn't bright, but it was there, pulsing, slow and deliberate, like the heartbeat of the creature I had seen in my visions. The tunnel stretched out before me, carved from ice and rock, leading deeper into the earth. I couldn't tell how far it went, but the air was thick with that same oppressive presence, pulling me forward. The walls seemed to shimmer in the low light, frost clinging to the surface, and there were markings, symbols, etched into the ice. They were intricate, swirling patterns, nothing I recognized, but they felt wrong, like they weren't meant for human eyes. I kept moving, my steps echoing in the silence, my breath shallow. The deeper I went, the more the air seemed to press in around me, growing heavier with every step. It was almost as if the ice was closing in, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were alive. Then I saw it. At the end of the tunnel, the space opened up into a massive chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness. In the center of the room was a structure, something huge, ancient, covered in ice and frost. It looked like a massive machine, but not one built by human hands. It was organic in its design, The metal twisted and curved in ways that made no sense. The same glowing light pulsed from its core, slow and rhythmic. And then I realized this was the source of the signal. Whatever this thing was, it had been buried here, deep beneath the ice, for God knows how long. It was alive. I could feel it, the same presence that had been in my head, pulsing from the machine, reaching out to me, pulling me closer. I stepped forward, my flashlight flickering as I approached the structure. The hum returned, faint at first, but growing louder with every step I took. My heart raced as I got closer, the sound vibrating through my body, through my bones. The markings on the walls seemed to pulse in time with the hum, the symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the surface of the machine. It was cold, colder than anything I'd ever felt. But beneath the cold, there was something else, something alive. As soon as my fingers made contact, the hum surged, vibrating through my skull, and the presence flooded my mind. Images flashed before my eyes, visions of the ancient city, the shadowed figures, the massive chamber deep beneath the ice. But this time, I saw more. I saw them. The figures weren't just shadows. They were beings, tall, thin, their faces hidden behind masks of metal and bone. They moved through the city with purpose, their long limbs graceful and deliberate. And in the center of the city, I saw the machine, the same machine that now stood before me, pulsing with life, a beacon of power. And then I saw the destruction. The city fell, crumbling beneath the weight of something vast and unstoppable. The beings tried to fight it, tried to contain it, but it was too late. The machine, it wasn't a tool. It wasn't something they had built. It was something they had found, and it had destroyed them. I snapped back to reality, gasping for breath, my hand jerking away from the machine. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through the chamber, shaking the walls, the floor. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, pulsing in time with the machine, the air thick with energy. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind spinning. I had to get out. I had to leave. But then, something moved. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the shadows playing tricks on me. But no, it wasn't the shadows. It was the machine. The surface rippled, the metal shifting and twisting as if it were alive. And then, from the center of the structure, something began to emerge. A figure, tall and thin, just like the ones I'd seen in my visions. It stepped forward, its body moving with a slow, deliberate grace, its face hidden behind a mask of bone and metal. It wasn't human. It was something else, something ancient, something that had been waiting beneath the ice for far too long. And now, it was awake. I backed away, my flashlight shaking in my hand as the figure approached. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through my skull, the presence in my mind stronger than ever. I could feel it probing at my thoughts, slipping into my mind, searching for something. I turned and ran. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran, the sound of the hum echoing in my ears, the presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. I scrambled up the ladder, my hands numb from the cold, my breath coming in ragged gasps. By the time I reached the top, the hatch had closed, sealing whatever was down there back beneath the ice. But I knew it wasn't over. Whatever I had found, whatever was buried down there, it wasn't going to stay asleep for long. I burst through the door of the hatch room, gasping for breath. The station's cold air hit me like a wall, but it felt almost comforting compared to what I had just seen below. My heart was hammering in my chest, and the hum, though faint now, still echoed in the back of my mind like a distant, relentless whisper. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm myself, but my hands were shaking too much to stay still. Whatever that thing was, whatever had crawled out of the machine beneath the ice, it was awake now, and it had seen me. The door to the room slammed shut behind me with a heavy clang. The sudden noise jolted me out of my daze, and I forced myself to stand up, to move. I needed to find Willis. He had to know what was happening. He had to know that whatever we were dealing with was far beyond any of us. The corridors of the station were empty, eerily quiet. The hum of the heaters, once a background noise I barely noticed, now felt sinister, like they were trying to mask the real threat. I stumbled through the halls, my footsteps echoing off the metal floors as I made my way toward the control room. When I got there, Willis was alone, hunched over one of the monitors, his face illuminated by the pale glow of the screen. He looked up as I entered, his expression immediately shifting from exhaustion to something much darker when he saw the look on my face. "What happened?" he asked, standing up quickly. I struggled to find the words, my mind still reeling from the vision, the presence. "I went into the hatch." Willis froze, his face going pale. "You what?" I didn't mean to," I stammered, trying to explain. "The door was open, and there's something down there, Willis. Something alive." His eyes narrowed. "You shouldn't have gone down there. It's dangerous. We don't even fully understand what we've uncovered." I shook my head, my frustration boiling over. "It's not just dangerous. It's awake. I saw it. It came out of the machine. Whatever it is, it's not human." Willis stared at me for a long moment, the tension in the room thickening like ice between us. "You shouldn't have gone down there," he repeated quietly, but there was something in his tone now. Fear. I took a step closer. "You knew, didn't you? You knew something was down there, something that wasn't supposed to be disturbed." Willis sighed, rubbing his hands over his face, as if he could wipe away the weight of what was happening. He didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I thought he wasn't going to, but then he spoke, his voice low and strained. "We found the signal a few months ago," he said, his gaze distant. "At first, we thought it was just some kind of geological anomaly, maybe a seismic shift or interference from deep underground. But the more we studied it, the more we realized it was something else, something ancient." He paused, glancing at the door as if expecting someone, or something, to burst in at any moment. "The machine you saw," Willis continued, "it wasn't made by humans. It's been buried beneath the ice for thousands, maybe millions of years. We don't know who or what built it, but we do know one thing. It wasn't supposed to be found. The signal, it wasn't just a message. It was a warning." My blood ran cold. "A warning? About what?" Willis met my eyes, his face pale and drawn. "About what happens when the machine is turned on." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "You activated it, didn't you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That's why the signal got stronger. That's why the hum started." Willis didn't deny it. "We didn't know what we were dealing with," he said. "We thought we could control it, study it. But when we activated the machine, something woke up, something we couldn't stop." I felt a chill run down my spine. "The thing I saw, it's part of the machine, isn't it?" Willis nodded slowly. "It's not just part of the machine. It is the machine. Or at least, it's connected to it." We don't know if it's a life form or something beyond our understanding, but whatever it is, it's been waiting beneath the ice for a long time. And now it's awake, I said, the words feeling like a weight in my chest. What does it want? Willis shook his head. We don't know. We've tried to communicate with it, but it doesn't respond the way we expect. It's alien, in every sense of the word. I stood there in stunned silence, trying to process everything. This was more than just some scientific anomaly. This was something far worse, something that could change everything if it got out. Just then, the lights flickered. A low rumble echoed through the station, followed by a sharp, high-pitched sound that made my teeth ache. The hum was back, louder now, vibrating through the walls, through the air. Willis stiffened, his face paling even more. It's happening again, he whispered. What is? I asked, but before he could answer, the station's alarms blared to life, a harsh, shrill sound that sent a wave of panic through me. We need to get out of here, Willis said, grabbing my arm. Now! We bolted out of the control room, the halls of the station bathed in red emergency lights, the alarm blaring relentlessly. The air was thick with that same oppressive presence, the hum growing louder with every step we took. As we reached the main exit, I looked back down the hallway. For just a moment, I thought I saw it again, a tall, thin figure standing at the end of the corridor, its face hidden behind that mask of metal and bone. It was just standing there, watching us, and then it was gone. We burst through the doors into the freezing night, the cold wind biting at my skin, but it felt like a relief compared to the crushing weight of whatever was happening inside the station. The sky was dark, and the distant roar of a storm echoed across the frozen landscape. Willis stopped, glancing back at the station, his face tight with fear. It's spreading, he muttered. The machine. It's spreading. What do you mean? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. The signal, Willis said, his voice shaking. It's not just coming from the station anymore. It's reaching out, across the ice, across the world. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a local problem. Whatever had been woken up beneath the ice wasn't content to stay there. It was going to spread, and if it wasn't stopped, it wouldn't just consume us. It would consume everything. The wind whipped across the frozen wasteland as we stumbled away from the station, our breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. The weight of what Willis had said bore down on me like an avalanche. The machine wasn't just awake, it was spreading. The signal was reaching further, touching places it shouldn't, and the storm that had been brewing above us wasn't natural anymore. It was something much worse. As we moved further from the station, the ground beneath our feet trembled, a low rumble that reverberated through the ice like a heartbeat. I could feel it growing stronger, pulsing in time with the hum that filled my mind. The presence was everywhere now, wrapping around us, watching, waiting. Whatever had been locked beneath the ice for centuries was no longer content to stay buried. I glanced back at the station, now a distant silhouette against the swirling storm. The lights flickered through the falling snow, and for a moment I could see them, those tall, thin figures moving through the corridors, their faces hidden behind those alien masks. They were like shadows, flickering in and out of existence, almost as if they were phasing between this world and another. And then the lights went out. Willis grabbed my arm, pulling me forward. We have to keep moving, he shouted over the howling wind. His voice was tight with fear, his eyes wide with desperation. If we stop, it'll take us. What do you mean? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could feel it, the machine, the presence. It was hunting us, pulling us back, like a predator stalking its prey. Willis didn't answer. He didn't need to. The terror in his eyes told me everything. We pressed on through the storm, the wind biting at our exposed skin. But no matter how far we ran, the hum stayed with us. It was inside my head now, louder than ever, vibrating through my skull, pushing into my thoughts. I could feel it trying to worm its way deeper, prying at my memories, searching for something. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was alive, conscious, and it was trying to take control. The snow was blinding, a thick wall of white that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Every step felt heavier, like the ice itself was pulling us down. My legs burned with exhaustion, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but we couldn't stop. I knew without a doubt that if we stopped, we wouldn't survive. Then, just as I thought my legs might give out, I saw it, a small outbuilding, barely visible through the storm. It was one of the old supply shacks, half buried in the snow, but still intact. I pointed it out to Willis, and we made a desperate sprint toward it, the wind howling in our ears. We threw open the door and collapsed inside, the sudden warmth hitting us like a wall. The shack was small, just a single room with a few crates and a half-broken heater in the corner, but it was enough. For now, it would keep us safe. Willis slammed the door shut, leaning against it as if he could physically keep the presence out. His breath came in short, panicked gasps, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I could see it in his eyes. He was losing it. I sat down on one of the crates, my body shaking from the cold and fear. "What do we do now?" I asked, though I wasn't sure there was anything left to do. Willis didn't answer at first. He just stared at the door, his eyes wide, as if he was waiting for something, waiting for the presence to come crashing through. "It's too late," he muttered finally, his voice hollow. "It's already spread too far." I shook my head, refusing to accept that. There has to be a way to stop it. The machine. There has to be some kind of fail-safe, something we can do to shut it down. Willis laughed, but there was no humor in it, just fear. "You don't understand. This thing, it's not a machine in the way you think. It's alive. It's been alive for longer than we can comprehend. The beings that built it, the ones you saw in your vision, they weren't trying to control it. They were trying to contain it." I swallowed hard, the reality of what we were facing sinking in. This wasn't just some alien technology. It was something far older, far more powerful than we could ever hope to understand. "Then why did you activate it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why mess with something we don't understand?" Willis shook his head, his face pale. "We didn't know. We thought it was just a relic, some ancient piece of tech we could study. But the more we probed, the more it responded. We triggered something we couldn't stop." I stood up, pacing the small space, trying to think. There has to be a way to shut it down. Maybe if we... The sound of cracking ice cut me off. It wasn't a subtle noise. It was deep, like the earth itself was splitting apart. I froze, my heart pounding as the sound grew louder, closer, and then, from beneath the floor, I felt it, the hum, stronger than before, vibrating through the shack, through my bones. The presence was here. Willis stood up, backing away from the door, his face a mask of terror. "It's here," he whispered. "It's found us." Before I could react, The ground beneath us shook violently, and the walls of the shack trembled. The crates rattled, the heater flickering, as the entire structure seemed to groan under the weight of something massive moving below us. And then the door burst open. A gust of freezing wind slammed into the shack, knocking me backward as the figures from the station, those tall, thin beings, stepped inside. They moved slowly, deliberately, their faces still hidden behind those grotesque masks of bone and metal. The presence in my mind surged, overwhelming me, pulling at my thoughts, my memories, like it was trying to consume me. I struggled to stand, my vision blurring as the hum grew deafening, vibrating through my skull. The figures approached, their long limbs reaching out, and I could feel it. The machine, the thing beneath the ice. It was reaching through them, through me. And then I realized something. It wasn't trying to destroy us. It was trying to assimilate us. Willis collapsed to the floor, clutching his head as the figures surrounded him. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. But they didn't touch him. They didn't need to. They were inside him. I backed away, my hands trembling, but there was nowhere to go. The presence was inside me too, pulling at my mind, tugging at my memories, and I knew, deep down, that there was no escape. The signal had already spread. It was too late. The last thing I remember, before everything went black, was the sound of the hum, louder than ever, drowning out everything, until there was nothing left. Nothing but the signal. I've always been curious about the dark web, not in a creepy, I want to see the worst of humanity kind of way, but more out of sheer fascination with what might be out there, lurking beneath the surface of the internet. You hear stories, some real, some exaggerated, about what goes on in the hidden corners of the web, and I guess I've always had a habit of going too far down rabbit holes. One night, after too many hours of mindless scrolling, I stumbled across a discussion on one of those obscure conspiracy forums. It wasn't like the usual stuff about government cover-ups or cryptids. This was different. The post was titled, "Alien Sightings on Demand." The thread was short, just a few lines, but the premise was bizarre enough to catch my attention. The author claimed to have found a service on the dark web that could arrange alien sightings for people. Not like fake UFOs or cheesy photoshopped images, real sightings, the kind where you'd see something with your own eyes. At first, I laughed it off. It had to be a joke, right? But the more I thought about it, the more curious I became. The idea that someone could offer such a service was ridiculous, but also intriguing. What if it wasn't a hoax? What if there was more to it than I was willing to admit? I don't know why I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was the boredom. Maybe it was that nagging voice in the back of my head, the one that always pushes me to dig deeper. Whatever it was, I found myself searching for the link. It wasn't easy to find. The thread didn't provide direct access, just hints, breadcrumbs, like it was a puzzle meant only for those who really wanted to solve it. I should have stopped then. I should have closed my laptop, walked away, and never thought about it again. But I didn't. A few hours of digging, and I found the service. The site was as minimalistic as it gets. Just a black screen with white text and a single prompt. Request your sighting. No details, no explanation, just an empty text box waiting for input. I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to type. The whole thing felt like a trap, but at the same time, I couldn't resist. After a moment, I typed, "What does this cost?" Almost instantly, a reply appeared on the screen. "It's free, but there's always a price." That should have been my second warning to stop. I knew it deep down. But again, my curiosity got the better of me. I typed, "I want a sighting." The screen went blank for a few seconds, then the text returned. "Location?" I didn't expect it to be this straightforward, but I typed in my town. After all, if this was some elaborate hoax, nothing would happen, right? I had nothing to lose. The next message sent a chill down my spine. "Done. Look to the sky in 48 hours. That was it. The site closed itself down, and I was left staring at my desktop, wondering if I had just fallen for some stupid prank. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was all a waste of time. But a part of me, a small, anxious part, couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The next day came and went without incident. I went to work, scrolled through my usual news feeds, and forgot about the whole thing. By the time I got home that evening, I had convinced myself that I had been played. It was all just some weird dark web joke, and I'd gotten caught up in it. But on the second night, things changed. It was around 10 p.m., and I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the cool night air. The street was quiet, just the occasional car passing by in the distance. I'd all but forgotten about the alien sighting request when I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. There, just above the tree line, something moved, something that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was a plane, but there were no blinking lights, no sound of engines. It was just a dark, silent shape, gliding through the sky in a way that made my skin crawl. I sat up, my heart racing, trying to get a better look. The shape was large, much bigger than any aircraft I'd ever seen, and it wasn't moving like one either. It hovered for a moment, just hanging there in the air, and then, as quickly as it appeared, it shot off into the distance, disappearing behind the trees. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a drone, it was something else, and it had happened, just like the sight promised. I had seen something. I rushed back inside, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. It couldn't be real. It had to be a trick, an illusion, something to mess with my head. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the image of that dark, hovering shape stayed burned into my mind. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the message. Done. Look to the sky in 48 hours. They had made good on their promise. And now, I couldn't help but wonder, what else was possible? For the next few days, I tried to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I found myself glancing up at the sky, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. But nothing happened. The skies were empty, the world calm, and slowly, I convinced myself that it was over. But then, it started happening again. It wasn't just the sky anymore. I began seeing things, strange shapes, fleeting figures, out of the corner of my eye. At first, it was subtle, like shadows moving just beyond my field of vision. But soon, it became more frequent, more distinct. I would be walking down the street, and I'd catch a glimpse of something in the alleyway, something that didn't belong. Tall, thin shapes, moving too quickly, too quietly. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself I was imagining things, but it kept happening again and again until I couldn't deny it anymore. They were everywhere. It was small things at first, just quick flashes in the corner of my vision, like a shadow darting between buildings or something moving just out of sight. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, maybe a trick of the light or my eyes playing games with me, but it kept happening, and every time it did, my skin would prickle with that deep, uneasy feeling like when you sense someone's watching you. At first, I brushed it off. I mean, how often do we glance at something and mistake a tree branch or a flicker of light for something else? But this wasn't like that. It was more deliberate, more purposeful. There was something in the way these shadows moved that I couldn't explain. The first real moment when I knew it wasn't all in my head happened about a week after the sighting in my backyard. I was walking home from work, just like I did every day. It was late, around 9 p.m., and the streets were mostly empty. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, and the occasional car passed by. But other than that, it was quiet. That's when I saw it again. Out of the corner of my eye, there was a figure, tall and thin, standing by the entrance of an alley. At first, I thought it was just some person, maybe waiting for a ride or something. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't standing. They were hovering, just a few inches off the ground, their body unnaturally still. No sound, no movement. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a second, I thought about stopping, about getting a closer look. But something deep inside me screamed to keep walking, to not draw attention to myself. So I did. I kept my pace steady, eyes forward, like I hadn't seen anything. My hands were clenched into fists, the hair on the back of my neck standing up, every instinct telling me not to turn around. But I did. I couldn't help it. When I looked back, the figure was gone. Just like that, the alley was empty, nothing but the usual dark shadows and trash bins. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I hurried home, locking the door behind me, like a kid afraid of the dark. For the rest of the night, I kept checking the windows, glancing out into the street, half expecting to see that hovering figure standing in the distance, watching. But the street was empty. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd been overworked, too stressed out, and my brain was just looking for things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I had seen something real. Over the next few days, the sightings became more frequent. It wasn't just in the dark anymore. I'd see glimpses of those same tall, thin figures during the day, standing in the reflection of shop windows, watching me from across the street, moving between buildings like shadows. They were always just far enough away that I couldn't get a clear look, but close enough to know they were there. I started to feel paranoid. Every time I walked outside, I could feel eyes on me. It was like these figures were following me, waiting for something. But what? I didn't know. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining it, that it was all in my head. But the sightings weren't the only thing that was happening. It started with small disruptions. My phone would glitch randomly, the screen flickering with static before going back to normal. Sometimes I'd get strange texts from unknown numbers, just garbled messages, like someone was trying to communicate but couldn't. I tried blocking the numbers, but the texts kept coming. The strangest part was the radio. One night, I was driving to grab some food, and out of nowhere, the radio started picking up static. I switched the station, thinking it was just interference, but every channel was the same, just loud, crackling static. I was about to turn it off when I heard something through the noise, a voice. It was faint, buried under layers of static, but it was there. I could only make out a few words, and even those were hard to understand. But I knew it wasn't just random interference. The voice was repeating something, over and over, like it was stuck in a loop. "They're here." I slammed the radio off, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't turn it back on for the rest of the drive. Things escalated quickly after that. The sightings became more intense, more deliberate. It was like they knew I could see them now, and they weren't trying to hide anymore. I'd be sitting at home, minding my own business, when I'd catch a glimpse of a figure standing outside my window. But every time I looked directly at it, it was gone. The worst part wasn't just seeing them, it was the feeling that came with it. The overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen. It wasn't just fear, it was deeper, more primal, like these things weren't just watching me. They were waiting for something I couldn't stop. Then came the night that everything changed. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, too on edge to sleep. My mind was racing, replaying every sighting, every strange occurrence, trying to make sense of it. That's when I heard it. The hum. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, like a low vibration coming from somewhere deep in the house. I sat up, listening closely. It wasn't coming from the street or from the neighbors. It was inside the house. I got out of bed, my hands shaking, and slowly made my way toward the sound. The hum grew louder as I walked down the hallway, the air around me feeling heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. It was like the walls were alive, buzzing with energy. I followed the sound to the living room, where it seemed to be the loudest. The room was dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from the window, just enough light to cast long, eerie shadows across the floor. That's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the corner of the room, watching me. It wasn't like the others I had seen. This one was different, closer, more solid. I could see its tall, thin frame, its elongated limbs, its eyes. Those empty, hollow eyes that seemed to bore into me, reading my thoughts, my memories. It wasn't moving, just standing there, perfectly still, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. My heart pounded in my chest, my legs frozen in place. I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through the room, through my bones. And then the figure took a step toward me. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The figure in the corner stood there, motionless, except for that one step. Just one, but it was enough to send a jolt of panic through my entire body. It wasn't human, that much was obvious. It was too tall, too thin, and its movements had a strange, unnatural fluidity to them, like it was something that wasn't used to wearing a body like ours. The hum was louder now, vibrating through the walls, pulsing in my ears, making it impossible to think. My hands were shaking, my heart hammering in my chest as I stared at the thing standing just a few feet away from me. I couldn't run. I couldn't scream. All I could do was watch as the figure took another step forward, its hollow eyes locked onto mine, like it was studying me, waiting for something. And then it spoke. Not in words, exactly, but in thoughts, directly into my mind. I didn't hear its voice in the room. I felt it, deep in the back of my head, like a whisper that wasn't meant for human ears. "You asked for this." The words made no sense at first. My mind was too clouded by fear, too consumed by the sight of this thing, to understand what it meant. But then, the memory flashed back. The dark web service, the request I had made, the sighting. This was because of that. The figure took another step forward, and I could feel its presence pushing deeper into my mind. It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was inside me, searching, prying through my thoughts, my memories. I could feel it rummaging through my mind like it was looking for something important. My knees gave out, and I collapsed onto the floor, my back against the wall. The room felt colder now, like the air had been sucked out, leaving nothing but the sound of the hum and the weight of the figure's gaze. I couldn't look away. I couldn't move. "You wanted to see," it whispered, "and now you can't unsee." Terror gripped me as the figure slowly reached out, its long, bony fingers extending toward me. I flinched, bracing for whatever was coming, but before it could touch me, something changed. The hum stopped. The figure froze mid-step, its hand hovering inches away from my face. The room fell silent, and for a moment, it felt like time itself had paused. I didn't understand what was happening, but the suffocating pressure that had been building in my chest suddenly lifted, and then the figure vanished. Just like that, it was gone. No slow fade, no sound, just gone, like it had never been there in the first place. I gasped for air, my heart still racing, my body trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. My eyes darted around the room, expecting to see the figure lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing. The room was empty, just as it had been when I first walked in. For a long moment, I sat there, frozen, my mind struggling to catch up with what I'd seen. The hum, the figure, the strange voice in my head. It was all too much. I needed to get out, to leave the house, but my legs wouldn't move. They were numb, useless beneath me. After what felt like hours, I finally forced myself to stand. My body was heavy, my limbs shaky, but I managed to pull myself together long enough to stumble toward the front door. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to be away from that room, from the feeling of those hollow eyes staring into my soul. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, snapping me out of my daze. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic still bubbling inside me, but it didn't help. I could still feel it, the presence, lingering just beyond my reach, watching me. I walked down the street, trying to make sense of everything. Was it real? Had I really seen that thing in my house? Or had my mind finally snapped from all the stress, all the sightings? But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something real had happened. Something I couldn't explain. For the next few days, I avoided my house as much as possible. I crashed at a friend's place, telling him I was dealing with some weird electrical problems at home, but I didn't give any details. How could I? He'd think I was insane. But the sightings didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. Everywhere I went, I could feel them. Those figures, watching me, always at the edge of my vision. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of one standing in a crowd, the hollow eyes locked onto me before disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. Other times I'd see them in reflections, on the surface of water, in the glass of shop windows. Always there, always watching. I started to lose sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that one of them was standing at the foot of my bed, just waiting for me to acknowledge them. And then there were the voices. They didn't speak like before, not in full sentences or clear thoughts, but I could feel them inside my head. It was like they were whispering things I couldn't quite make out, just enough to keep me on edge, just enough to make me question my own sanity. The worst part? It didn't feel random. It felt intentional. They weren't just following me, they were tracking me, step by step, slowly closing in. One evening, I decided to go for a drive, hoping that getting out of the city, away from everything, might give me some clarity. I drove for hours, out past the suburbs, into the empty stretches of road that cut through the countryside. No buildings, no people, just me and the dark, empty highway. For a while, it worked. The further I got from town, the lighter I felt, like the presence that had been hovering over me had finally loosened its grip. But then, it happened again. I was halfway through a long stretch of road, no lights, no other cars in sight, when my headlights caught something ahead. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a shape in the middle of the road, like a shadow cast by the trees. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a shadow. It was one of them, standing there, in the middle of the road, its tall, thin frame illuminated by the beam of my headlights. It didn't move. It didn't flinch. It just stood there, staring at me with those empty, hollow eyes. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The car skidded to a stop, but by the time I blinked, the figure was gone. The road was empty. I sat there, frozen, the engine idling, my mind racing. I knew I wasn't alone out there. They were still with me, following me, watching, and now I wasn't sure if I could ever escape them. I didn't drive home that night. I couldn't. After seeing the figure in the middle of the road, something inside me snapped. I wasn't safe anywhere. It didn't matter how far I drove, how fast I tried to escape. They were always there, always watching, waiting. The moment I saw that figure vanish into thin air, I realized something terrifying. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, they would find me. I pulled off to the side of the road, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel, and tried to catch my breath. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. The empty highway stretched out in both directions, not a single car or house in sight. I was alone, but somehow that made it worse. The silence was suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. My mind raced, thoughts spinning out of control. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that maybe I was hallucinating, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen them again and again, and each time felt more real than the last. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the road, but eventually I forced myself to start the car and drive. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to keep moving, as if staying in one place too long would make things worse. The headlights cut through the darkness, and the hum of the engine was the only sound keeping me grounded. But the feeling of being watched never left. It clung to me like a second skin, growing heavier with each passing mile. Every shadow on the road felt alive. Every flicker of movement at the edges of my vision sent a jolt of fear through me. And then, as I rounded a bend in the road, the radio crackled to life. At first, it was just static, a sharp burst of noise that startled me. But then, through the crackling, I heard it again, that same faint, garbled voice from before. "They're here!" The words sent a shiver down my spine. I reached for the dial, trying to turn the radio off, but no matter how hard I twisted the knob, the voice wouldn't stop. It kept repeating, over and over, growing louder with each pass. "They're here! They're here! They're here!" The words were distorted, like someone was speaking through layers of static, but the message was clear. I slammed my hand against the dashboard, desperate to make it stop. but the voice only grew more insistent. And then the car died. The headlights flickered once before going out completely, plunging me into darkness. The engine sputtered and went silent, leaving me stranded in the middle of the road, with nothing but the voice on the radio and the pitch-black night pressing in around me. My stomach dropped. I was trapped. The voice on the radio cut out, and for a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling, but as soon as I turned the screen on, it flickered and died too. No signal, no light, nothing. I sat there in the darkness, paralyzed by fear, and then I saw them, through the windshield, faintly illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the trees. I could see figures standing in the road. At first, they were just shadows, barely distinguishable from the night around them. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized they weren't just standing there. They were surrounding the car. There were at least 5 of them, tall and thin, just like before. Their bodies were unnaturally still, their heads tilted slightly, as if they were observing me, watching. I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their gaze piercing through the darkness, pinning me in place. My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I didn't know what to do. Running was out of the question. I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from civilization, with no phone and no way to call for help. The figures didn't move. They just stood there, silent and still, as if they were waiting for something. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, every second dragging on like an eternity. I could feel the weight of their presence pressing down on me, suffocating me, making it impossible to think. And then, one of them moved. It took a single step forward, its long, spindly leg bending at an unnatural angle as it moved closer to the car. My breath caught in my throat. The figure's movements were slow, deliberate, like it was testing the limits of its own body, or mine. Another step. I could see it more clearly now. The way its skin, or whatever it was made of, seemed to shimmer in the moonlight, shifting and changing as it moved. Its face was still hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze locked on me, drilling into my mind. I panicked. Without thinking, I reached for the ignition, desperately trying to start the car. The engine groaned, sputtered, but refused to turn over. I tried again, my hands shaking, my eyes flicking back to the figure inching closer and closer. The third time, the engine roared to life. The headlights flickered back on, illuminating the road, and the figures standing directly in front of me. For the first time, I saw them clearly, and my blood ran cold. Their faces weren't human. They weren't even close. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tightly over angular skulls. Their eyes were black, hollow pits, too large for their faces, and their mouths were small, lipless slits. They looked like something from a nightmare, something that didn't belong in this world. Before I could react, the figure nearest to the car raised its hand, pressing its long, bony fingers against the hood. The metal groaned under the pressure, the car shaking as if it was being pulled apart. I floored the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, knocking the figure back, and I sped down the road, the tires screeching against the pavement. My heart was racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The figures were gone. The road stretched out behind me, empty and still, as if they had never been there in the first place. But I knew better. I could still feel their presence, still hear the echo of that voice in the back of my mind. They're here. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The highway was empty, and the hum of the engine was the only sound in the night. But I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot, because now they weren't just watching me, they were coming for me. I didn't stop driving until dawn. My mind was a tangled mess of fear and adrenaline, and I could barely process what had just happened. Every mile I put between me and the figures felt like a small victory, but no matter how far I drove, I knew it wouldn't be enough. The sunrise should have brought some comfort, but it didn't. Instead, the daylight only made the reality of my situation more terrifying. The figures, the things, had found me, and they were everywhere. No matter where I went, they would follow. This wasn't about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I had invited them into my life. I had asked for this, and now I was paying the price. I pulled over at a gas station on the edge of a small rundown town. The place was nearly empty, just a single cashier who didn't look like he wanted to be there. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. My hands were still shaking, my body on the verge of collapse, but I couldn't stop moving. If I stopped, they'd catch up. I needed answers. I needed to know what these things were and why they were after me. And more importantly, I needed to know if there was any way to stop them. That's when I remembered the dark web service. It seemed insane to go back to the very thing that had started all of this. But what choice did I have? I grabbed my laptop from the back seat, locked the car, and walked into the gas station. The place had an old payphone in the corner, but more importantly, there was free Wi-Fi. I sat down at one of the tables near the window and powered up my laptop, my mind racing. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, doubt creeping in. Was this really the solution? Or was I just digging myself deeper into a nightmare? But I didn't have any other options. I pulled up the dark web browser and navigated back to the service, the same page that had promised alien sightings on demand. The website looked exactly the same as it had the first time I visited. Black screen, white text, and that single prompt, "Request your sighting." My heart pounded as I typed out a new message. How do I stop this? For a moment, there was nothing, just the empty black screen, the faint hum of the gas station's AC unit, and the low buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. And then, the reply appeared. "You can't." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold wave of dread wash over me. I tried again, typing more frantically this time. "Please, there has to be a way. How do I make them go away?" Another pause. The reply was shorter this time. "You saw them. Now they see you." I slammed the laptop shut, my mind spinning. There was no way out, no solution. The figures, the aliens, or whatever they were, weren't going to stop. I had called them, and now they were here. I stood up from the table, my pulse racing. The gas station felt too small, too quiet. I glanced around, half expecting one of the figures to appear in the doorway or out of the corner of my eye, but everything was still. Too still. I needed to leave. I couldn't stay in one place for too long. I grabbed my things and rushed out to the car, my heart pounding in my chest. The streets were empty as I sped out of the gas station, the tires screeching against the pavement. For hours, I drove with no destination in mind, just trying to outrun them. But the further I went, the worse the feeling became. That creeping sense that they were closing in, that no matter how fast I went, they were already waiting for me at the end of the road. By nightfall, I found myself on a deserted highway, the sun setting behind me and casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. The radio had been silent all day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something inevitable. And then it happened. The hum. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a faint vibration in the air. But as the minutes passed, it grew louder, stronger, like the sound was coming from inside my head. The same hum that had haunted me in my home, that had followed me everywhere, was back. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them. Figures, dozens of them, tall, thin shapes emerging from the darkness, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the fading light. They weren't running. They weren't even walking. They were just there, closing in, no matter how fast I drove. Panic surged through me, and I slammed on the gas, the car speeding down the highway at breakneck speed. But it didn't matter. No matter how fast I went, they were always there, just out of sight, waiting for me. I didn't know what to do. There was no escape, no way to outrun them. And deep down, I knew it was over. As the car roared down the empty road, the hum reached a deafening pitch. My head felt like it was splitting open, the sound drilling into my skull, filling every corner of my mind. I could feel them inside me now, their presence, their thoughts, their eyes. And then the car stopped. I didn't hit the brakes. The engine didn't die. The car just stopped, like something had pulled it to a halt in the middle of the road. The hum was gone, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence. I looked up, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw them. The figures were standing all around the car, surrounding me on all sides. There had to be at least 20 of them, maybe more. Their hollow eyes stared into the car, unblinking, their bodies perfectly still. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just watched. I was trapped. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I didn't know what they wanted. I didn't know what they were waiting for. And then, in the silence, I heard it. A voice. Not from the figures, not from the radio, but from inside my head. You wanted to see. The words echoed in my mind, cold and distant, like they came from somewhere far beyond this world. My vision blurred, my body trembling as the weight of their presence pressed down on me, suffocating me. Now you are seen. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the sound of the hum, deep and constant, filling the air, filling my mind, until there was nothing left but silence. I woke up in my car, parked on the side of the road. The sun was rising, casting a warm glow over the landscape, and everything was quiet. There were no figures, no hum, just the sound of birds chirping in the distance. But I knew they were still out there, watching me, waiting. Because once you've seen them, you can never unsee, and they never let go.